So it's time for another episode of How It All Ends. I've been following some peculiar sets of headlines in about the last 3 or 4 weeks. I'm going to string these together for you, and I'm going to relate them to how bad and really insurmountable our challenges are at this point. And again, the purpose of this series is not to, send people to jumping off of bridges. The purpose of these series is the reason I do this for my own purposes is to understand. I want to understand. I want to understand how bad it is. I want to understand what direction the problems are going to come from, and are the problems really as bad as they seem to be? Because no one else is talking about this, right? So we're on our own having to figure this out. And that's what I'm doing. And that's what this series is going to be about. This is not doom and gloom. This is information and planning, essentially. So, headlights. I like to be data-driven. I don't really go out and look for data. My methodology is, I think the first term it was applied to was called psychohistorical analysis. It stems from, this is kind of an aside, but you probably need to know where I'm coming from. Psychohistorical analysis was started, I think, about the First World War, and it's the study of just commonly available media. Of course, back then it would have been newspapers, and reading it carefully, reading between the lines, essentially. Like, what are the headlines? What are people reporting? What are people reading? What are people talking about in the editorial section? And trusting the sources that they are deliberately not trying to hide anything. They are talking and communicating. And as often happens even in private conversation, people will reveal more than they really expect to or even want to. So psychohistorical analysis is, reading a people, reading a situation, reading events in the everyday. So that's what I do. Now you can lead yourself down the garden path reading headlines, but on the other hand, this works. All right. So if you're careful and you know what you're doing, you know why you're doing it, then this works. So with that, by way of explanation, I've been monitoring the headlines. So a couple of things, I think three things. I dealt with India last week, so I'm not going to, last time, so I'm not going to talk about that right now. Instead, I will mention lumber, gasoline deliveries, and shipping containers. These are all current headlines as I make this recording today. You can look them up if you like. Item number 1, price of lumber. Price of lumber has been going through the roof. I mean, literally insane. No one understands what has happened to the price of lumber. My own personal experience, I could buy a 2x4 used in residential construction for $2 a piece, and now they're $8 a piece. Makes no sense. I mean, the lumber comes from trees. What happened? Are there no trees? Are there no sawmills? What happened to this? Well, again, if you listen to the pundits and read the headlines and read the articles, or at least skim them, there's various reasons for lumber to be priced the way it is. Bark beetle infestations in the forests can damage the lumber and make it not suitable actually for residential construction. You can use it for other things, but it means that a given acre of forest doesn't produce quite as much suitable construction lumber as it used to produce. That's one reason. Another reason is the pandemic. It just caused or encouraged some sawmills to shut down and somewhat constrict the availability of lumber. There's the crazy level of home construction right now, which, if you have been paying attention to my other videos, I actually make a case is tied to global warming. Okay. And the availability of trees can be tied to global warming because of the bark beetles. But I also heard something else, which is that the number of people willing to work in the forest felling the trees is decreasing. Okay, I used to do that kind of work. I was a college student. I did it in the summer to get out, right? To do something different, make some money, get out into the forest, and before I came back for my studies. So I know what that work is about. It's dangerous, it's dirty, it's noisy. You are far from home most of the time. It has some upside, but it doesn't pay really well. So one observation was that there are fewer people cutting trees. Now, the pandemic is partly responsible for that. These men are almost always older men. I've never really worked with any younger people doing that, except, again, myself when I was doing it. But I was only doing it part-time. These are older men. They've been doing it for, how that is, 20, 30, 40 years, career. And during the pandemic, some of them were sent home because the expectation was there wasn't going to be a lot of demand for lumber. It turned out to be not true. But they were sent home, and they liked it. So they didn't come back. It turns out no one wants to do that work. They just discovered they didn't want to do that work. And you can't hire people to do that work. And, there's enough options for people that age, with Social Security and other pension plans that they can, fall back on. They just decided, they discovered they liked their time, and they're not going back. They're older people, my age, older sometimes, and it's harder work every year. It gets harder, and they just stop doing it. And so that's a problem now. Now the lumber availability is being throttled by people not necessarily wanting to be out in the forest felling trees. Item number 2, gasoline. Headlines are screaming all over the media right now that don't be too surprised if your vacation plans this summer are curtailed. And the reason why it might be curtailed is because everyone, this is the part of the story, is that everyone is now breaking out of quarantine and lockdowns. They're all anxious to get going with their summer plans, and everyone wants to travel, everyone wants to fly, everyone wants to go someplace, and they're all jumping in their cars, filling up the tank and heading out. And they're going to do that every weekend, the entire summer. So prepare to run out of gas. And that, when I heard that explanation, that did not have the ring of truth to me at all. And it was later that someone said something that did have the ring of truth, that deliveries to service stations are being delayed and may not happen soon enough to refill the service stations. And the reason is because there's no one to drive the trucks. Typically in America, there's 5-10% of the trucks are parked because there's not a driver. And, that happens, right? People take vacations, bunch of people get the flu at the same time, whatever. So 5-10% of the trucks are parked. Right now, the number of trucks that are parked are 20%. Why? Well, again, during the pandemic, service stations were, shifting less fuel. People were not driving. A lot of people were working from home. They just stopped commuting. That should leave a lot of gasoline in the system, right? Just can be delivered any time. It's just sitting there probably in the refinery. It's sitting in the truck waiting for someplace to go. So that's not, maybe that's bad news for service station owners and for the, fossil fuel industry, but it shouldn't be causing any shortfall later that no one was buying gasoline for a long time. But now there's 20% of the trucks are idle. No one wants to drive a truck. They got laid off for a while. They've spent some time with the wife and the grandkids. These are the demographics of truck drivers. It's generally older. These are 50, 55, 60-year-old men. And they got some time off and they liked it. They're not going back. And you might say, well, okay, we'll just hire new ones. No, you won't do that. No one wants to do this work. It's really hard to get people. It's very time consuming to get trained to drive these gasoline trucks. They're essentially bombs with wheels on them, and everybody knows that. And it takes special certificates, special training, special experience, and then they'll put you behind the wheel of one of these bombs with wheels on it. All right. Not everybody wants to do that. Increasingly, as generations go forward, young men and women are not encouraged to go into these fields, truck driving and things like that. They're encouraged to do what? To get a degree in college and go work in the city and have a white collar job and be a teacher or a professor or whatever. Stock analyst, okay? And once you have a degree and you've got maybe some student debt, you're encouraged by market forces to go get a better job and not drive a truck. And so there's not a long pipeline of young men and women queuing up for these expensive trainings, these long, arduous trainings to go drive a truck, which is just a bomb with wheels on it. So this summer, expect to run out of gas at your local service station. And it's not some, conspiracy with the Illuminati, and it's just demographics. Old people have been doing this work, and they don't want to do it anymore. They're opting out, and no one's coming up to fill those positions. Now, it's possible that industry will adapt to the problem of not being able to find drivers. One option, they could come up with autonomous trucks, right? We all know that's in the works. Long haul trucks. The first ones won't be electric. They'll probably be diesel, but they'll be autonomous, no driver. And maybe if they're good enough, we can eventually do the gasoline deliveries to service stations with these autonomous trucks. Now, at that point, when the truck rolls in, either the service station attendant will have to come out and drag out the hoses and put the hoses in the spout and turn on the valve and run the fuel out into the underground tank. But more likely what will happen is there will just be a docking station, like you might plug your cell phone into to charge it, to be a docking station. And the truck will pull up, some automated arm will come out, align with the dock the hose, and dispense the fuel and pull it back and then drive off. And all this happens at 3 o'clock in the morning because there's no humans involved. So why do it during the middle of the day when there's traffic and there's people, causing trouble with the automation? So automated truck comes in, dispenses the fuel and leaves. That might happen someday. That's in fact my entire guess is completely 100% guess is that will happen because nobody wants these jobs. All right. But that's going to take 20 years, right, for that to happen. We don't even have the autonomous trucks. So for the foreseeable future, you getting your gasoline for your weekend trip, you're expecting some 65-year-old guy to drag himself out of bed, in Arizona and get into his bomb on wheels and arthritically climb into that truck cab and drive his arthritic old body to California to deliver your fuel. That's really what you're counting on. You're counting on that happen every day to fill up, or at least every week to fill up that underground tank at your service station. And you're expecting that to work for you. You don't know you're expecting that, but that's exactly what you're expecting to have happen for you. Item number 3. Since January, I think, there has been a huge traffic jam of container ships arriving on the West Coast. That means Los Angeles and Long Beach harbors from Asia. It got up to as many as 30 container ships in parking areas waiting to be unloaded. And there's various reasons why there are so many back, and that apparently that's a huge backup. And normally when you hear the container operators complaining, they say, normally I could get a container delivered from China with my goods in it, manufactured in China, of course, in 15 days, 20 days. Now containers are taking 45, 60 days to actually be unloaded in Long Beach. It doesn't mean it took that long to cross the Pacific Ocean. That's not really the problem. Crossing the Pacific Ocean is still whatever, 11 days or something. But there was so much congestion on the Chinese end, the Asian end, that it took 4 weeks before the ship could even depart. And then after its 11-day transit or whatever it is to Long Beach, it took another 6 weeks to get unloaded. And then once the containers were unloaded off the ships and placed in the dock, they had to wait another 8 weeks for a freight train to come and pick them up. A freight train or a cab over truck with a trailer. There are special trailers that take these containers. But that's a lot of logistics, right? That's a lot of connecting a lot of dots. And once again, the locomotives are being operated by old guys who, are retiring. The trucks are being driven by old guys who are, getting tired of doing this. And there's no one showing up. People are not showing up at the docks to haul these containers away. And then the containers are in the States for so long that they get lost. People are actually online looking for their container. If you're in a rail yard and you have a bunch of containers on rail cars and they're not moving, could you please go out and see if you can find one with the following serial number? That's my container. I want to know where it is. I can't find it. All right. So there's a common thread that runs through, several common threads that runs through all this. So I'm going to connect those threads. I'm going to connect those dots. I'm going to thread through the dots. And let's see what you think of this. One thread is we have globally instituted what is called a just-in-time manufacturing infrastructure. Walmart, to pick one, is famous for its warehouse on wheels. Walmart does not store anything. Storing things leads to losses. Things spoil, things are lost, things are damaged and can't be put on the shelf, things are stolen. It's just, and when something is sitting in a warehouse, it's not making money. So what Walmart does, they have a warehouse on wheels. They manufacture or buy something in China. They put it in a container. It comes across the sea. It gets unloaded immediately onto a conveyance. The conveyance goes to Walmart, and it unloads immediately into the back of the store. So things are stored, but there's no warehouse. It's just all just in time. And if Walmart is selling, poolside chairs, plastic poolside chairs, and some manager at Walmart notices that their stock of poolside chairs is down to, the last 10, then they put in, they go to their computer terminal and they enter a request for another 200 poolside chairs, and that goes into Walmart's fulfillment pipeline. And somewhere in China, there's a company making, probably 200 companies making poolside chairs out of plastic resins, and they find a provider who has something within the specifications what normally sells, white plastic, so high, so wide, whatever, something that's close to matching. And they order a bunch, put it in a container or probably several containers, and they have them delivered. And when they come to the States, they just disperse them to all the stores that had entered into the database they need some poolside chairs. So it all happens just in time. And that's how actually, Walmart is just the biggest and the best example of that. That's how actually the entire world is run right now. The entire world is run JIT, just in time. Another thing that's happening is that the workforce certainly in America and Europe and the UK, but also, other parts of the world, the workforce is aging. You can pretty easily find YouTube videos and other kinds of instructional videos on the looming demographic crisis in China, the looming current pressing demographic crisis in Japan, where the old people have held the jobs, kept the jobs, done the work, and now they're aging out, they're retiring. And, they are now going to be pulling down money from pensions, and there is not a bunch of young people going into those jobs to keep those industries working, those factories turning over. The young people have gotten college degrees instead, and maybe they'll go into accounting, maybe they'll go into logistics, maybe they'll go into computer programming, hardware engineering, something like that. But they've got advanced degrees, master's degrees, PhDs, and they're not going to be pushing papers and working in warehouses. They're just not. And as the prior generation, the post-war generation, ages out, these positions are not going to be filled. Now, maybe they can automate a lot of this stuff. Amazon is certainly doing that. Jeff Bezos is working with a lot of robotics companies, and they're automating warehouses, automating fulfillment. It's down to where people really just verify there's something in the box. They don't bother making sure it's the right thing, just anything at all. Yep, the box has something in it, so the robots didn't completely screw up. They close it, and they put the label on. Okay, there's a labeling machine. They peel the label off, they put it on the box, and the label is right there, the box is right there. They don't even know where that label came from or what it says or what the box, where it's going. They just know that there's a label in front of them, there's a box in front of them, they peel the label off and they put it on. That's what the human does these days. Okay, so you can well imagine that there's just one more step here of making sure that that when the box passes by on the conveyor, there's a labeling machine that puts a label on and it goes right out to a truck, which today is driven by a aging human, 65 years old, and tomorrow might be fully automated. So it's just as well they're automating these jobs because nobody wants to do them. They don't pay well, they're repetitive, and in the case of driving trucks, they're somewhat dangerous and harmful to the body. You're sitting, you're bouncing, you're being bounced around, you're on the freeway, you're inhaling carbon monoxide all the time, and it takes a toll. So nobody wants to do that. Nobody with a master's degree in electrical engineering wants to drive a truck. Duh. All right. And the third thing waving through all of this is that you may have noticed, if you're following along, we are at capacity. We can't cut any more logs than we're cutting now without drastic changes in how that's done. We can't generate more lumber, even though there's a massive housing crisis and there's huge a need to rebuild homes that burned last year and the years prior. Whole communities were burned. I'm not even joking. Entire communities were burned to the ground. And all that has to be rebuilt. And it's being rebuilt in many cases. Also, we have a lot of immigrants coming to the United States, particularly the West Coast and the West Coast of Canada. Why the West Coast? Because these are people coming from Asia. They have a lot of money, and they don't want to live in Asia. They're worried about, if they're living in Taiwan, they're worried about war with China. If they're living in Hong Kong, they're worried about their democracies being destroyed and eroded, and they're leaving. They're voting with their feet. They're pulling out, and they're coming to the West Coast. So, they feel an affinity for the West Coast of North America. The arrival of rich Chinese in Canada is such a phenomenon that they've started calling Vancouver Hongcouver. No, that's probably mean-spirited, but it probably is also a reflection of conditions on the ground. Canada has been favorable to Asian immigration, and they're emigrating from parts of Asia in droves, and they're taking advantage of the open door policy. Why wouldn't they? They should, and they're bringing money, and they're bringing, cultural richness, and the Canadians are opening their doors, and they're saying, absolutely, you're welcome here. You and your money are welcome here. So there's this huge housing boom, and Canada can't even send us their lumber anymore because they're using it themselves, I suppose. And the price of lumber has gone absolutely crazy. Insane. People are looking at this and they're just, it's a jaw-dropping problem, the price. We're at our limits. We can't get you gasoline. Joe Biden is saying he wants to see to gear the country for a 50% reduction in fossil fuel consumption. Well, he says emissions, but let's understand what that is. That means consumption. A 50% drop in fossil fuel consumption by the year 2030. And on the face of it, that's laughable. It's laughable. But then I see a headline that says, you may run out of gasoline this summer. Okay, so I don't think that's what Joe Biden had in mind. I don't think that's what his administration was thinking when they were saying we should reduce. In fact, his administration probably has no plan of any kind to actually enable a reduction of fossil fuels consumption by the year 2030 on that order of magnitude. They don't have to. All they have to do is mumble the words that we have this aspirational goal, and then they can go on about their business. Well, here comes reductions, right? Okay. Companies are saying employees don't have to go into the office. They're saying you can work from home, and people are now finding out that actually there isn't going to be gasoline at the service station anyway, for reasons that no one really wants to talk about, but are basically systemic. Meaning they're going forward with these kind of problems unless the industry can solve its problem of who's driving the trucks. We are at our limits. We can't get any more containers into the ports in LA and Long Beach. There's now ships sitting offshore. And when I was reading an article that had a little paragraph about what is the cause of this, and they didn't have too much to say, I was really surprised. I don't hear any reasons. They're talking about there's a cause for this and it's that and the other thing. And there was one sentence that said labor shortage. Labor shortage. And they didn't say it was because of a strike or a slowdown or any kind of deliberate union activity or anything like that. They just said labor shortage. There's a labor shortage. So you can imagine, once again, it's just like, there's no one to drop the trees. So you go to the port and there's no one operating the cranes. I shouldn't say no one. I'm overstating it, obviously. So obviously, there's someone operating the cranes. But what if a quarter of the cranes are not being used? And a bunch of ships come into the berths, and this crane is working unloading that ship, and this crane is working unloading that ship, but the other two ships aren't being unloaded at all. They're just sitting there, waiting for some operator to come to work, or waiting for some operator to get done with that ship so they can climb down from the crane, go across the tarmac, climb up on another crane, and continue working on the ship that's been sitting there. Labor shortage. We're at our limits. Nobody wants to do this work. It can't be done fast enough. And we are reliant on these things happening just in time. Just in time. That's the key. Everything on the global scale is just in time. And as we're seeing now with the containers, there isn't any slack in the system. If a container comes ashore and there isn't actually a truck to hook up to it right there on the spot, lift it up, put it on the truck, lock it down, head out the door for Walmart, okay? If that doesn't happen, lickety-split, boom, 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 done, okay? Then that container ends up being picked up by a forklift. It gets put over here on the lot. It gets put over there on the lot. Pretty soon it's on a train that's going to nowhere just to get it off the lot. The train goes to nowhere. The train gets moved onto another track. The train gets put in another city. No, everyone loses track of the train. They don't really need the train. And it just sits on some side track somewhere in Missoula, and no one knows what's on it anymore. Everything is just in time. And so long as that system works like clockwork, then it works. When it doesn't work like clockwork, it completely falls apart. And we're seeing the cracks in the system right now. And this is one of the ways in which, all of this ends. It doesn't end because someone says necessarily, okay, I'm going to unplug this thing. I'm going to turn this thing off. I'm going to flip all these breakers, and now it's done. It doesn't happen that way. It happens because we're overextended, that we've had all these money-saving and time-saving ways that we're managing our goods in flight, just in time, all the time, and then all of a sudden it starts to break down. It's because humans aren't there to do the work. The automation isn't there to take over from the humans. The industry has had a bad year. There's more demand than was expected, or there wasn't as much demand as expected. And the just-in-time system starts to crack and fall apart. And pretty soon you're losing entire containers of goods, and they end up on the wrong train heading to the wrong place. So these are just headlines. Nobody in these stories wanted to say anything bad or gloomy or apocalyptic. No one connected those dots and said, here's 3 headlines that are all saying the same thing. Major things, major headlines for major parts of our supply system saying exactly the same thing, that we're at our limits. Nobody wants to do this anymore. We're doing everything just in time, and it's not happening in time. So we have looming crises right now. We have the pandemic. We can talk about that. It's causing disruptions in supply chains. It's causing, things to not be available where they are needed. There's that, but there's also climate change. Climate change is coming. Global heating is coming. Now, I don't want to talk about the impact that's going to have on people, cities, regions, okay? Forests, for example, where we get our lumber, just to remind you quickly. Don't want to talk about the impacts of climate change. What I want to talk about instead is that climate change is now going to add another level of activity on top of what we're doing now. What we're doing now is moving iPhones to people who want a new iPhone. We're moving concrete, cement to places where people want to build houses and buildings and freeways. Where we have a plan right now. We're just doing our daily plan: food, electronics, consumer goods, the things that are part of our modern daily life. We're moving these things around, and we're at our limits already. We're at our limits. You want to build a home, you're going to have to pay $8 for a 2x4, and you might not be able to get one. And if you don't need one 2x4 to build a home, you need 300, depending on the size of your home. So not only is the price 3 times higher than it was, the availability is not anything near like what you need. So can you build your home? You need to build a home. Lots of people in your city need homes. This is basic modern life. Can we even do this right now at cost? That's something that anybody can really afford. And if you could afford it, if you're a developer, then you have to pass the cost on to people who are going to buy that home. Are they going to be able to buy the home? And if they do buy the home, are they have to go into massive debt? Or does the home buying, because of the cost of lumber, does the home buying become simply something that elites do? People with cash, people with millions of dollars sitting in the bank, and they don't care what the price of the home is. They need the home. They got a new job in a new city, and they need the home. Build me a home. What's it going to cost? I don't care. Just build it. I got a job. I've got $1 million a year job. Why do I care what the cost of my home is? Build the home. So they pay the $8 for a 2x4. They don't question it. So if you're one of those people, you don't care. But if you're anybody else, which is to say 99% of the rest of us, then you care a lot. So all of that is happening right now on a daily basis, just modern life, barely keeping it together with this just-in-time economy we have. And now climate change is going to come along. It has already come along. It is already impacting us. And we're going to have to somehow elevate our performance, the delivery of goods, the delivery of machinery, the allocation of materials to different regions all around the planet. We're going to, and of course, regions competing with each other to get at these necessary resources, like reinforcing iron and heavy equipment from Japan, China, and Korea, and all the other things it's going to take to fight climate change, to build the seawalls and raise the freeways and raise the airports and move the water treatment plant 1/4 mile inland, and all the things we're going to have to do. Those are going to be layered on top of what we almost can't do today because we've hit our own limits. Some of the limits are demographic, some of them are logistic, but they all conspire to place limits on what we can do going forward. And then we have this Godzilla coming on top of that. And we're going to have to do something about climate change. We're going to have to respond to it. We can't stop it. I mean, there's going to be talk of that, but I'm here to tell you, you can't stop it, right? It's here, and once it's here, whatever is here today and whatever comes tomorrow, you're going to be stuck with. This is Earth dynamics, okay? You don't just turn it off. You don't just turn it off. You can't do that. Whatever we do, we're going to be stuck with. So whatever level of harm we have engineered into the system, that's going to be what we're going to be, and we have to respond to it. So all the modern life right now is starting to hit limits on what we can actually do with our just-in-time economy. Is not going to be adequate. So we're going to have to make some hard decisions. You know, when the container trucks are coming over from China, do we want iPhones on those containers, or do we want, tens of thousands of tons of reinforcement iron to rebuild freeways and airports and seawalls and everything else because of sea level rise? When lumber is coming from Canada and the U.S. mills, how are we going to use it? Are we going to use it to build new McMansions for the wealthy elites coming here from Hong Kong and China and Taiwan, or are we going to use that same scarce lumber to rebuild homes that have burned to the ground in these communities that are catching fire because of global heating, right? So how are we going to allocate this resource? We barely have enough to do what we're doing right now. How are we going to do more? The answer is you don't do more. It's hard for me to imagine how we solve that problem. No one wants to do the work, and it's all just in time anyway. And it really is not engineered for a crisis. It's not engineered to respond to a long-term crisis. It isn't. It can barely respond to our everyday needs. So Joe Biden might end up getting his 50% reduction in the consumption of fossil fuels through the back door. We simply can't do things anymore. Now that's a broad brush. I just made a huge stroke from the just-in-time economy can't keep us moving to we have a 50% reduction in fossil fuel consumption. Well, we had a 17% reduction in fossil fuel consumption because of the pandemic. So there's a data point for you. So maybe we get a 50% reduction if the JIT economy falls apart, or is only adequate to fight climate change and not adequate to get you a new iPhone, or skis to go skiing, or a new car, or a part for your car, or a chip for your car. General Motors ran out of chips. Now, they don't talk about that much. Why did General Motors run out of chips? I wonder. Maybe they're stuck on a container somewhere in Missoula, right? That just didn't get handled correctly because there was no guy to drive the truck. Don't know. So I titled this Global Strangulation. And that's kind of what this feels like to me. This kind of feels like we're gasping for air. There's plenty of air. That's not the problem. We could continue doing things this way, but we're being throttled. And if I understand it correctly, those problems that are causing us to start to throttle are actually systemic. They're not one-off temporary things. These could be systemic problems driven by, on the one hand, demographics. People don't want to do that work anymore. What are you going to do about that? Are you going to have criminals do it? You're going to haul people out of prisons and say, hey, you're driving a truck. Okay, fine. Maybe you do that. You conscript your labor from the prison force, or maybe from the military. Are these people certified to drive bombs on wheels? Are they? Would you trust them to drive a bomb on a wheel? A convicted felon dragged out of prison to drive a truck? To deliver a fuel? Really? Is that okay with you? That may be one of your options. Conscript your labor. Take soldiers, put them in trucks. This is, driving fuel bombs around the countryside. I don't know. I don't have to know, right? I don't have to know how they can solve this problem, and I don't have to guarantee that they can. But it's a problem. We've hit our limits, and that could be a permanent feature of modern life going forward. We'll see, won't we?